helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, certified Christian counselor and director of Ottawa's Elim Counselling Services.
Hi, I'm Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services, and I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Life Transformation Radio Show. As usual, we have another interesting show lined up for you today. Today we'll be doing part 2 of the Assertiveness show. Those of you who were on last time listening to the last episode will realize that we didn't finish that show. So now we'll be giving you other strategies of assertion. And I want to look at some biblical references as well that give examples of people in the Bible who were assertive. But before I get into that, I want to tell you about upcoming events that we're having and maybe a little bit about Elim Counselling Services for those of you who are not familiar with us. Let me begin with telling you about Elim Counselling Services for our new listeners. Elim Counselling Service is a professional counseling service located here in Ottawa. We have trained psychotherapists that are registered with the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association, and we provide professional counseling from a biblical perspective. Our services are covered by most insurance companies, and the people that we see are not only Christians. So if you're listening today and you might feel, well, I am not a believer, you're welcome. We see people from all the demographics of society. So if you want to find out more about us, you can visit our website at elimcounselingministry.com. You can also call us at 613-699-1677, 613-699-1677. And again, today's show is about assertiveness. And with me in studio today is the assertive Melissa Wagot. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I've had this past week to practice some of the tips you started to talk about last week, because I know for myself this can sometimes be a challenge, and hopefully through today's show we can give the listeners and myself a few more tips about how we can bring assertiveness into our day-to-day life. And one thing that we mentioned in last week's show, and just for the sake of the listeners, I think it's important to bring up, is a really special event for you and the Elim Counselling Services team. There's a bit of a conference coming to Ottawa, the nation's capital of Canada. Can you go into a little bit about what the conference is about and how people can get involved if they think it's something that would be of interest to them? That's
right, Melissa, and thank you for reminding me about the conference. Elim Counselling Service will be putting on a free conference on September 26, 2015. It's a conference that will run from 9 to 12. September the 26th is a Saturday, and we'll be having a workshop that will include workshops that will cover many different topics pertaining to anxiety and depression and other mental health challenges. The conference is entitled Tackling Depression, Anxiety and Other Challenges, the Keys to Transforming Your Life. Now, who is this conference for? This conference is for people who might be battling mental health issues, but it's also for those people who want to have ideas and techniques as to how to help people who are suffering from mental health challenges. The conference is also for parents of teenagers who might be battling mental health issues and might be looking for ideas. And we'll be having many different speakers, not just myself, but other speakers in the mental health field and from other organizations who will be participating in this conference. But again, it's a free conference, but I want to encourage our listeners that if you wanted to guarantee a spot at this conference, you should register right away, because the spots are already filling up. We have a limited seating, so even though it's free, you can't just turn up on the day. We require registration.
And I think you can find more information too about how to get in touch on our website. Is that correct?
Absolutely. If you go to Elim's website, Elim, E-L-I-M, Counselling with 2L's Ministry.com, there is a conference registration form that you can fill out online to guarantee your spot at the conference. And you can also call us directly at 613-699 if you're not an internet person. You can call us online and we will be happy to put you on the list. So again, please check out the conference and give us a call if you're interested in registering.
Sounds like it's going to be a great day. And much like we've done on the show, we're really trying to bring awareness that mental health issues affect many people out there, and it's really important. If you need help or someone you love needs help, to reach out, and this is a great opportunity for people to get some help that they may be needing. And so as you said off the top, we're going to be continuing our show on assertiveness, and I've been practicing my assertive interactions, as I said, through the past week. And you came up with a few more biblical examples. I think last week we had touched on Esther's story and how she was a bit of an assertive woman of her time in her interactions, and she took on the king in spite of potential consequences to her. And I think if I remember the story correctly, she said, I'm going to paraphrase. So this is the Melissa version of the Old Testament. I'm going to go see the king because the issue is so important to me, even if it means that I may die. And you had acknowledged through our discussions last week how her actions demonstrated someone who is acting in an assertive manner.
Absolutely. So here we have a woman by the name of Esther saying that there is a need that exists. There is a situation pertaining to my people, and I'm not just going to sit down and make the situation continue. I'm going to do something about it. So I'm going to present myself before the king. Now, Esther is, first of all, the first step that she's taking in assertiveness is saying, I am preparing myself to do something about my situation. A lot of time people get caught into passive situation because they feel powerless. They feel, I can stand up to the authority figure. Who am I? Esther could have said that. She could have said, I'm just a woman that's the king. But however, she said, this situation is serious enough and important to me enough that I want to do something to change that situation. And there may be people listening to my voice at this point in the show who are thinking, yes, I can identify with that. I'm in a workplace situation that is causing me stress, and I know that something needs to be done, but I feel powerless. Or you might be in a relationship situation where you realize that you have been hurting, but you have become passive. But deep down, you know that there is something that you need to do to change that situation. So I guess that's the first step in realizing that something needs to be done. But we find something else that is important in the Esther story, that there was a collaborative approach. Now, Esther, if you read a passage in Esther 4 verse 16, we find that Esther didn't just say, yes, I'm going to do this all by myself. Esther sought counsel, and if you read the story, Esther asked people who were in her community to start fasting with her. And then she said, I myself also will fast. So I see that as a kind of collaborative approach. Like I realize that I am taking on something really big here. So I'm not just going to go and just do it on a whim. I'm going to collaborate with others. She's collaborating not just with her people in her community, but by fasting, she's actually collaborating with God. She's asking for guidance from a power beyond herself to deal with this very important situation. So I guess that's another step in assertiveness, that when you begin to feel powerless and you begin to feel as if you're no match for the situation, instead of just being passive and withdrawing into isolation, begin to involve others. This was what Esther did. She began to involve others because she realized that in herself she was no match for this situation.
And I think it's sort of that strength in numbers approach too, but it also reinforces, because sometimes I think when you're trying to stand up for yourself and you're on your own, it's maybe the grandness of the situation or the bigness of the situation, you can talk yourself out of it. You can say, oh, it's not a big deal, or that's not that consequential. But sometimes when you bring it forward to sort of a more distant second, third party and have a bit of reflection, they can reinforce what you're feeling as, no, you've got your facts in check. This is something that needs to be addressed, and then give you counsel on how you can address it.
Right.
Because maybe you've never stood up to the king before, or your manager, or whatever. But you can go to someone else who maybe has been in a similar situation and been successful and say, how did you approach it?
Absolutely. So you can learn from the experience of others. Others can support you by giving you advice. Others can support you by giving you objective feedback as to whether or not the situation that's a big deal to you, it's really a big deal, or if it's something that should be addressed any at all, or maybe it's something that maybe you should just wait out. So I think it's when we look at that passage in Esther 4:16, we're seeing that Esther didn't go this solo. But a lot of times people make that mistake to feel, if I am powerless, then I have to remain in. If I feel powerless, then I have to remain in this situation and do nothing about it. I think the first thing you can start doing is to involve others, collaborate with others, seek strength from others, seek guidance from God. And as you begin to do this, it prepares you to be assertive. So I think that takes me into the next step, because we see that there was a preparation phase that is involved in assertiveness. Esther prepared. She didn't just go for it and say, I'm just going to go to the king. The passage gives you the sense of preparation. Not only was there a decision made, not only was there collaboration, but there was preparation. Esther prepared to go and to confront this situation.
And I think it helps you with that preparation. Last week too, we had discussed you can be passive in situations, but you can also be very aggressive in situations. And I think sometimes when you don't prepare, you run the risk of just storming the gates, guns blazing, emotions high, her sword swinging in the air. By taking that moment to pause and kind of collect your thoughts, it can temper some of those emotions that may cloud a situation and swing you to the other spectrum that's not assertive, which is that aggressive sort of confrontation. Yes. I'm seeing fire in her eyes and steam coming out of her ears kind of thing. But the preparation helps to temper that, I think.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, Melissa, because that's key. Because when people have been taken advantage of, when people feel victimized, when people feel that their needs have not been met, they're in a passive situation for a long time and do nothing about it, the risk that they run is that one day they're just going to blow up. And you talk about fire in their eyes. They're going to get to a place where they just snap and say the wrong thing or do something just out of impulse, and then regret it and think, I shouldn't have done that.
I shouldn't have confronted them that way, which is true. You shouldn't go super aggressive.
Right.
And then you run the risk of going back and being passive and never trying it again.
Right. Or someone might do something like they walk off the job because they have been frustrated all these years, but they walk off the job and say, I quit, and then realize, how am I going to pay my mortgage?
Exactly. I didn't have another job lined up.
I didn't have another job.
And then you sulk back into the office and say, can we redo that? Which probably doesn't work very well.
So we see that Esther prepared. And if you're feeling that you're no match for the situation, then you're in good company, because Esther actually felt like that. If she felt that this was in her league, there would not be the need to collaborate and to prepare and to make this decision. It was something that she would just do haphazardly. But because she felt she was no match for the situation, she prepared. And I think preparation can involve even writing out a script and practicing that script. And this is actually something we do in our practice. If someone who has been sexually abused, for example, has now come to the point where of healing, where they're now at a point that they're going to confront their abuser and they're going to be assertive and said, you do this to me. It's not something that can be done just by waking up one morning and saying, okay, this is the morning I'm going to confront my abuser. This is something that takes careful planning. We write out a script. We go through several versions of that script to make sure that it's edited for tone, to make sure that the content is correct, and to make sure that what they need to say is covered in that script. So that preparation is the key. If you've just joined us, you're listening to the Life Transformation Radio Show. This is your host, Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services.
And Melissa Waggett.
And we want to thank you for tuning into this show. And today we're discussing assertiveness. And we have looked at a number of principles that is found in Esther 4 verse 16. If you have missed those principles, you can listen to the podcast of this show on our website at elimcounselingministry.com. The podcast can also be found on the CHRI website by going to the Life Transformation link on the right hand side of the screen of the CHRI website. If you're not familiar with Elim Counselling Services, you can find out more about the type of counseling we offer and about the qualification of our therapist at elimcounselingministry.com. If you need help or you need to help a friend, please give us a call or contact us by email. Our telephone number is 613-699-1677, and you can find our email contact information and other contact information on our website. So again, we're talking about assertiveness, and we talk about the Esther principle, and we said that Esther made a decision that she was going to confront the king. We talked about the fact that Esther did not do this solo. She collaborated with others around her. And that collaboration pointed to the fact that she felt she was no match for that situation alone. So it's important to realize that if you feel you're no match for the situation, it's not an excuse for you to remain passive. It's an excuse for you. It's an opportunity for you to say, you know what, I'm really no match. She was no match for the king. That's Esther. But she said, I'm going to collaborate. We talked about preparation, that in how Esther dealt with the situation was an example of preparation. She did not just wake up one day and, had a bad hair day and say, I'm going to go to the king, storm into the king's office and tell the king how I really feel. But we see something else in that story, Melissa, and I think we touched on it last week. We see that Esther had very realistic expectation.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's highlighted by the fact that she hoped it would go well, but was also cognizant of the fact that there were some risk involved in her approach. Mm-hmm. And probably in that preparation phase, she went through the pro-con list of inaction and action and came to the choice within herself that in spite of the potential risks for her, moving forward was what she needed to do at that time.
Right, absolutely. And I think I would call it healthy expectation, mm-hmm. because whenever there's a situation where you have to confront an issue and you have to be assertive, it's good to have healthy expectation. Let me just explain what I mean here by healthy expectation. There is the possibility that a person going into an assertive situation could think, okay, if I just assert myself, I've been doing all of this assertiveness training by listening to Michael Hart and Melissa Waggett, and I now know how I'm going to be assertive, and I'm going to be assertive, and I'm going to get my way, and this means that my needs are going to be met. I think that's not a realistic expectation. I think if you're going to be assertive, healthy expectation says, I'm going to assert myself because I know it's the right thing to do regardless of how things turn out. Mm-hmm. So that is saying things could go well, things could turn out for the worse, because the person who I assert myself with might still not listen to me. But then you have to look at what are my other options if that worst case scenario plays out. But we see healthy expectation in the story of Esther, in which she used the word, she says, if I perish, I perish. But what is important in that healthy expectation is that Esther didn't let that become a barrier to her going forward with her plan. This is the right thing for me to do. I'm going to go to the king. I'm going to present myself to the king, even though I know that I could perish, because I'm going into the king to talk about a need, and I'm not following necessarily going through the right channels. But it's so important that I have to run that risk. Now, the trap that a lot of people fall into who have been victims or who are in abusive relationship is that when they think about becoming assertive, they get stuck on thinking about how the other person is going to respond, and that becomes a barrier to going forward. Oh, if I talk to him about how I really feel and that he's abusive in how he talks to me, he's just going to get angry.
Mm-hmm. And so my question to that though is sometimes there is a real risk perceived. Maybe they have tried to stand up for themselves in the past and they've gotten verbally aggressive or whatnot. Mm-hmm. What suggestions would you give in those situations? I recognize that every situation is unique, mm-hmm. but just to be clear, I don't think we're saying if the risk is death, continue to move forward just because it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. So if you can go into that a little bit, I think it'd be helpful.
Absolutely. So if you're in a situation where it's an abusive situation and you are in fear of your life, the answer there is not passivity. The answer there is not to say, oh, if I speak up for how I feel, I'm going to be killed, or he's going to become or she's going to become physically abusive, so I better not say anything ever. The answer there is to go to one of the steps that I talked about earlier, which is preparation. So preparation in that case could involve an exit strategy. I'm going to confront this situation and I'm going to make plans that I'm going to be out of that house. I'm not going to remain in that. I'm going to go to a shelter. Preparation there could mean that I'm going to confront that situation when there are others around, when I'm in a safe place, to make this person know that I am no longer going to remain in that abusive relationship. I am moving out. Preparation there could involve bringing others into the situation, such as the police. If it's a situation where you feel that you have been abused over and over and over again, when I says having realistic expectation there. And Esther saying, "If I perish, I perish." It's not a recipe or a recommendation to be reckless, because the earliest stage of preparation shows that Esther was not being reckless. It was a careful, calculated decision to confront. So in that long-winded approach, I've just said that, I'm not asking people to put themselves in danger and to say, okay, I'm going to speak up to someone who is violent in a scenario that is going to put me at risk. But I'm saying the earlier principle of preparation will take care of that or minimize that risk.
And so in the interest of time, I know you have a few other biblical examples that you wanted to touch on about how within the Christian circles and spiritual circles, assertiveness can play out. And that especially sometimes you'll hear the term that I'm the Lord's anointed, or God's will is with me, when someone is maybe in a leadership role, and sometimes being assertive with that individual or groups of individuals can be a challenge because you think you're going against God. And so in exploring those types of examples biblically, I was wondering if you could also continue to touch on some of those strategies people can employ within their own day-to-day lives in sort of practicing their assertiveness muscles. I know last week and through the story of Esther, we've talked about a few, if I recall right. It was looking at the different fears that are potentially there, or the different risks, and we saw that in Esther in her preparation phase. And last week too, you had talked about a sort of broken record methodology of tackling some of these situations. So I'm interested in your tips and tricks and excited to try to practice them in my own life. So I'm interested to hear how we as a group can get more assertive in our interactions.
Absolutely. But let me just go to what you said about this notion in Christian circles about not touching the Lord's anointed. I think there is this mistaken notion that as believers, if there is someone that is in leadership, then you should never challenge that person. And I think that leads to a kind of passivity where people sometimes in church circles, they just sit back and they see corruption, they know that there's sexual immorality going on, or they know that there's something amiss with the finances in the church, or that other members are being taken advantage of, and they remain passive. They don't assert themselves to say, I'm speaking out because this is going on and I'm not comfortable with it. And so when that happens, it just perpetuate the situation where this unhealthy and dysfunctional situation remain. So there is this passage in the Old Testament that people usually use to justify not confronting a leader, and it's with David and Saul, where when Saul was backslidden and Saul was to the point where he wanted to kill David, and David had opportunity to kill him, that David did not do anything to Saul. And the people use that to say you should never challenge the Lord's anointed. But we should note there that, while the key point in that passage is that David was not using violence against the Lord anointed. It didn't mean that David could not have a conversation with Saul about what he was doing wrong. But corrupt leaders sometimes use that passage to put themselves in an authoritative position where they can never be questioned. But we should balance scriptures with other scripture, and we see other reference in the Old Testament. There's a situation in the Old Testament where we see that Saul had given this edict to his soldiers that they should not eat until the battle was completed. But Jonathan did not get the email.
Yeah.
And so we found in that passage that Jonathan, his son, ate some honey. And the Saul had given the edict that no one should eat. So when Saul found out that Jonathan had disobeyed the edict, Saul said he's going to put Jonathan, his son, to death. But what we find happening in that situation is that the soldiers who were under Saul stood up to him, asserted themselves, and said, "What are you doing? You can't put Jonathan to death. Look at what Jonathan has done for our army." And what is interesting about that story, we see that Saul backed down. Mm-hmm. Because Saul, the king, realized, because the people under him stood up and say, "No, Saul, we are not going to sit back here and let you harm Jonathan. That is not a good thing to do." So in that passage, it's an example of assertiveness. And I think it's important for us to know that because someone is in a position of leadership or even spiritual leadership doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with them about things that they're doing that you might believe might be off base.
And so are there any other tips you can give people in sort of exercising the muscles of assertiveness in their day-to-day life?
I think one of the important strategy of assertiveness is using the I technique in speaking about I, because they're about how you feel about situation. So when you go to confront a situation, people will sometimes refute the facts. They will sometimes come up with arguments that can counteract and convince you otherwise about factual things. But when you talk about, I feel this way about this situation, or when you do that, it makes me feel, or when I see this happening in the organization, it makes me feel. I think that puts you in a situation where you're not wrong because you're talking about how you feel, and that's a very powerful way of asserting yourself. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for today, but I think we have covered a number of important bases. Thank you very much for being with us on this show again, Melissa.
You're welcome.
And thank you very much for all your listeners out there who have listened to this episode of the Life Transformation Radio Show. Until next time, this is your host, Michael Hart of Elam Counselling Services, praying that God would bless you in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.